Welcome back to Simon & White, the podcast at the crossroads of media, business, and politics. I'm Christian White and joined as always by Mark Simon. Mark, please say hello.
Hey, everybody. How are you?
Mark, you're about to go over to Fantasy Island, right? Taiwan, which has its presidential election, I think, January 15, 13. I'm getting it mixed up with 13, the Iowa caucus. Okay. And widely expected that the incumbent party will get an extension with a new president, with William Lai, the successor to President Tsai Ing-wen. Both of the DPP, the Democrat Progressive Party, the nominally sort of skeptical of Beijing, formerly pro-independence, but not too fancy about it, and will prevail over not just the KMT opponent, but against an independent. But the DPP is having a bit of trouble. They're not. They may not have a majority in the legislative yuan, which is their version of Congress, which will make for some difficult governing decisions. And the economy over there is okay, but not great, and certainly not what you'd think of with in terms of an Asian tiger that ought to be growing fast and providing a lot of investment opportunities, a lot of employment opportunities, et cetera. So is that the right way to size things up? What are you expecting as you look over the horizon there?
I think what we've seen is, essentially it always seems to break down out around, 40% for the DPP, 33, 34% for the KMT, and then 29 or whatever. In other words, it's 1, 2, 3 with always 13 or 14% undecided. And, if you're basically a week out and you're undecided, you're a moron. In other words, those people are probably not going to vote. I mean, that's really, if you think about it. I mean, in America, what do we say? Most people have made their decision by the first week in September, second week in September, who they like, who they're going to vote for. I think the DPP knows this. Lately, the commercials they've been running have been very much go DPP, stay with us. It's about voter turnout now for them. I think the KMT has done much better than people have thought. The screeching voices of the DPP, I call them the arts and crafts people. It's really shocking how few business people are entrepreneurs the DPP has. In other words, every time I meet one, somebody goes, "Oh, he's a big businessman." I'm going like, "Oh yeah, he's the public affairs guy," or something like that. You know what I'm saying? In other words, there's just so few. People in the business community aren't hostile to the DPP, but they know that they're not going to get what they want. It's still a very much left-leaning party. So the economy is the main issue in Taiwan. It really is. The DPP always wants it to be China because that helps them. It's kind of like their abortion issue for the Democrats. In other words, we're going to go to that. We're going to get these voters. I put the similarities very, very close. I think the DPP wins. I think that basically the rationale really is that a lot of people just don't trust the KMT. The KMT vice president, Zhao Saikong, is actually a very good campaigner, and he's a very smart guy, and he's a very decent guy in many ways. I've met him a couple of times. But he's kind of old school. I don't think they trust him. I think Ho is the DPP lead, KMT lead candidate mayor. I think he's a much better candidate than we've seen out of the KMT before. He's good on his feet. He's good on the street. But again, it's that lingering KMT problem. It's like their philosophy is nobody under the age of 40 will vote for us, and we're proud of it. And so that's their problem. Mayor Ku, the TPP, which is really his personal party, is the way I look at it, is a disaster in every way. But he's managed to let everybody put all their hopes on him. All the young people love him, everything like that. And I bet he doesn't get 15% of the vote. I think it's going to be flat. Here's the issue that really is the problem for the DPP. I think Chai got 53% of the vote in 2020. That's pretty impressive. 53% is a solid win in a democratic society. I don't think Lai and the DPP break 45 this time. If they don't, I think it's highly unlikely they pull the legislative wand with them. I think they lose that. It becomes split between the DPP, the KMT, and the TPP. I don't think the TPP goes into alliance with the DPP. I know they'll try, but it won't happen. And so I do think what we're going to see is split government. That's probably not the worst thing, though, largely because I think it'll stop the DPP from their worst aspects of them in terms of basically provoking China. I thought there was a very good editorial by David Rennie. I'm sure he won't hear this, but if he did, of The Economist, who basically said, look, the DPP people in their hearts of hearts still like independence. And everybody knows it. They chafe. Why can't we be an independent country? Unfortunately, they do that knowing full well that's the expense of American lives. In other words, it's the biggest problem I have with the DPP. I think they are reckless with American lives. I think that started with Chen Xiaobin, and I think they've never really stopped. I think in fairness to President Tai, I think she was not. But I think the core of the party, the heart of the party, and I meet these guys all the time, and they give me a hard time all the time, they really want to know why the U.S. is not going to make them, let them do what they want to do. And I think that's a huge problem. But my real thing is, if he doesn't get 45%, he doesn't get the one. The other part of not having that 45% is I do think the KMT and the Chinese will be causing trouble quite a bit. They'll almost set up a shadow government around them, and they'll be cutting deals with mayors and with townships and with, all kinds of different people over there around them. So I think it's going to be interesting, but I do think the DPP wins the main show. And we'll see what happens in the legislative one.
Yeah, maybe this is an oversimplification, but it does seem a little bit like a situation then of John Major or George H.W. Bush, where not that Tsai Ing-wen is Ronald Reagan or Margaret Thatcher, but that you just have this decay in incumbent parties over time, and you see the opposition trying different things, still making some of its old mistakes. If you look at what it took to get Tony Blair to be the leader of the Labour Party in the UK, or Bill Clinton to be the Democrat nominee here, it took a lot of very unique circumstances. It wasn't just the party got together and said, gee, we've been out of party power for an awful long time. Let's straighten up and fly right. But looking ahead, it seems like a forecast of political turbulence in Taiwan, and
which is not the worst thing, other than and I think the military purchases are taken care of for two reasons. The first thing is they're going to ram them through right now. They're already, they're not rammed, but they're already through. The second thing is, unfortunately, in my perspective, the U.S. has given a little bit too much aid to Taiwan. So in other words, they don't need the legislative yuan to do this now. And so, in other words, they're going to get what they need. But they just announced, I think it was 60 more fighters and, coming and all these things. But look, in fairness to the Taiwanese also, it was like, we're not delivering the stuff. I think the backlog's above 20 billion now. Somebody told me the other day it's really 20 billion that they paid for. And it's like, when is it coming? Oh, it's in Ukraine. Oh, when is it coming? The Japanese are shipping stuff to us in other places. So I think we're going to watch this election. I'll be over there. If you want to we can talk about it after it happens. No special insights other than it has really literally been this same numbers for the last 2 or 3 months. In other words, it really hasn't changed much. But I think the DPP will have a better get out the vote campaign. They tend to be very good at that, and we'll see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if the KMT, scores above 35%, because I think the TPP people are not going to show up. I really don't think they're going to show up, and I think that's it.
And the last time around in 2020, earlier, Tsai Ing-wen, who was in her first term, faced a primary challenge, if I recall correctly, from Vice President Lai, now likely to be elected president, was in trouble, some of the same problems with the economy. But then Hong Kong happened, and there was the crackdown there, just Beijing reminding people of its brutality and its penchant for breaking promises, and the complete destruction of one party, two systems. One
we
country.
Can talk about it. We might as well jump to Hong Kong now, because I'm definitely involved. I think you are too, a little bit there. I've seen your picture up there a little bit there.
I think you looked more sinister, I think.
I am. I do.
They're good at catching you. They must have like had a guy hiding in the bushes. So some of the pictures I've seen of you in Hong Kong media of, I think they probably caught you in the morning when you're walking out. You're like that.
No, yeah, it's meant to be. I actually heard a story one time, and I don't know if it's true or not, but apparently there was a pretty good picture of me in East Week magazine. And so everybody said that's a really good picture of Mark, and it was the last time we ever saw it. It was like take a picture of him, and as people can tell, I don't take a really good picture. I have a voice, I have a face for radio, But it was really, I love those stories. Look, it's difficult for me. I mean, it's easier for you, but it's difficult for us because, we don't want to say anything that's going to hurt the defense. But by the same token, we know the end result here. It's very amusing to me sometimes. And I say it's amusing when I meet people or I talk to people who say, "Oh, how will the trial go?" And I'm going like, I mean, that's pretty much like asking, does the firing squad shoot straight? You know what I'm saying? I mean, they may not get you on the first round, but somebody will walk by and put a bullet in you. Jimmy's going to be convicted. I mean, they're setting it up. It's going to happen. I saw this very clearly in the way the fraud case, the case for that was handled. People forget that. The reason why I'll go back on this is this started out as a commercial dispute, which I was directly involved in. I mean, it was basically my office was the claim. This is what that it was that small. It was tiny. We literally had a commercial dispute going on with nobody was talking police. Well, then the government came in and they started looking at it. Of course, they were looking to trip Jimmy up on stuff. Somebody leaked it. They found it. They did their digging. I think they knew there was a commercial dispute going on. They grabbed it, they grabbed it in the headlines and basically attacked on it. But the funny thing is that everybody forgets who did the attacking. The CID didn't do the attacking. The Science Park didn't do the attacking. In other words, the CID is the Criminal Investigation Division. The fraud guys didn't come in. It was investigated by the National Security Police Division. It was prosecuted by a national security prosecutor, and it was judged by a national security judge. My point is they wanted to make sure that this happened. And he got sentenced to basically close to 60 months. I think it was like 59 months for essentially a dispute where there really is no victim. In other words, nobody lost any money here. In other words, this is
the commercial thing where basically it's like if you're running a donut store, but you also sell trinkets on their side, you say, "Oh, well, you said you want a donut store and you're selling trinkets, so we're going to put you in jail for 5 years."
That's the perfect analogy. Look, the biggest problem that I've had with this fraud case, and it's very amusing, the biggest problem I've had is having senior lawyers over here when I've talked to business groups say, "You've got to really have us describe it because nobody believes you. Nobody believes that this could be a criminal case."
Right.
I've literally been in 2 or 3 briefings of talking to business groups, like small business groups, and the lawyer in the room will brief it. Usually, a friendly lawyer or something like that. In one case, it was out in the California. It was around the Stanford area, and a conservative lawyer said, "This is what happened." He said, "I've never seen anything like it in my life. I practiced in London. This is everybody I talk to. They know what this is." But here's my point. My point is they really are. Jimmy is what they want, and that's what they're going to do. And they have to have this narrative. And I tell people it's just I'd like to tell people that there's a chance here, but there is no chance. He's going down, and we'll see how long he's sentenced for. We do have some other things that I think the government has not counted on. There is a guy testifying, or his testimony's coming out. I don't know if he's been on the stand yet, named Andy Lee. He was one of the I wouldn't say student leaders, one of the young leaders. I've never met the guy. I know Jimmy's never met the guy, but apparently we're his bosses, according to the government. You're one of his bosses too, by the way. We're all his boss.
Excellent.
And so that's what we found out. But what's come out and what's obvious, and we've known this for a while, we've all known this for a while, that people have kind of just, I think, unfortunately skated by it. The Washington Post writer Shabani Mahatini and Tim McLaughlin, who worked, they wrote an article in The Atlantic together, but they also wrote a book called The Braves. They basically have come up with just insurmountable evidence that he was tortured. This guy, Andy Lee, who was testifying against Jimmy, was tortured. And so now Andy has a full-on story about us, and that works very well, except for when you start picking it apart, which I'm sure somebody is going to pretty soon. Mm-hmm. But this kind of has changed the dynamic, I think, a little bit for Hong Kong, and they don't really realize it. I think they're going to wake up to that all of a sudden now it's like, torture. And Hong Kong I make this allegation clearly, they set this kid up to be tortured. They set these young guys up to be brutalized. Because they were under surveillance already in Hong Kong. That's been in the press before, and it's been leaked, that the Hong Kong police had this small group of individuals that Andy Lee was a part of under surveillance. And this group was the 12 that tried to make it to Taiwan on a speedboat. And they got caught by the Chinese police. That's the story here. So what happened is, they left Sai Kung Harbor, 3 of them, and then they went up to Tai Po. The entire time, it looks like they were being tracked. In fact, there's no doubt about it. Then they left Tai Po trying to make it on the speedboat to Taiwan. But here's the point when they were trying to make it to Taiwan from Tai Po. The Hong Kong police, the Civil Air Service and their police were up in a plane above them. And we know that because the plane buzzed them. In other words, so they knew they were there, but they let them cross into Chinese waters. They let them cross into where the Chinese Coast Guard would pick them up. Chinese Coast Guard picked them up, took them back to Guangzhou, and effectively tuned up Andy and a couple of the other ones, by the way, basically tortured him to get him to say what they wanted to say. He came back to Hong Kong. He has been in a mental institution the entire time, along with another guy who's lying for a little bit other reasons. I mean, basically a lower sentence. So it's actually the torture angle, I think, is something that I don't think a lot of people really looked at. I think they can blow by it. They think they're going to be able to blow by it. But, I don't think people in the international community are so ready to do that. And
yeah, well, to put that in perspective, so, Hong Kong went from a place with no political prisoners, where it wasn't, a full-blown democracy in the way of a Western one, but had some, had elections and had some directly elected members of the Legislative Council. But to go from that to then all of a sudden they have political prisoners, then they have this national security law. But you're right, it's a big deal that now they've gone another step to witnesses for the prosecution being tortured to provide evidence they want. I mean, that's a huge evolutionary step. This isn't just, they didn't, they did one country, two systems for at least a couple of decades, and there's still some semblance left, and things aren't that bad unless you're in trying to, create a political party or child. I mean, that's one thing. But then to say, but they also torture people to get what the evidence they want, that's a huge step, it seems like.
No, it's a monster step. And it's also, I think, for those who still, that's why I think it's so shocking to us. It's going to be a real problem for the people who are still trying to live in this bubble that Hong Kong is still a regular city. Is the Hong Kong way basically was to let you out. I mean, I had a lot of dealings with the police over the years, and essentially, if you came to Hong Kong and you were causing trouble and that you were going to leave, many times that was just fine with them. I mean, in other words, it's just a thing. Singapore, Japan, the same way. As long as nobody's been physically hurt or nothing's stolen, and you're problematic, then you leave. And I think the fact of the matter is they grabbed this guy up, and they think they needed him to, and all of a sudden it became like, well, let's get Jimmy Lai. One of the things that people forget, I think, is really important here, is that early on, when Jimmy was first arrested, they took him down to his yacht in Sai Kung. Mm-hmm. And they took him to his yacht and they paraded him around. It's all in public. It's in the papers. Why did they do that? They were trying at that point in time to tie him into basically the escape of these individuals. And we know that because people who are no longer there in Hong Kong have told us that they were trying to say, okay, did Jimmy pay for the boat? Did Jimmy pay for this? Did Jimmy do that? In other words, did he help them abscond? And they were openly speculating that he did, and he didn't. We didn't have any notion of it, but it is a very disturbing, in other words, precursor to what happens. They've locked in on a narrative early that Jimmy was the mastermind, that all these things. And, it's always been that way, though. It's been very, very strange. I can tell people, I remember in 2012 and, very, very difficult. Like, here's the thing that people never know. I never met Joshua Wong until 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Only time I ever met
Joshua was quite big during the umbrella movement, which was in 2012. Young guy then, still young, and
that's right.
But that was, sort of spontaneous disruption of commerce in Central, and so a lot different than what would occur.
Yeah, I never met Joshua. I met Nathan because Nathan would come to like Western receptions and things like that, but I never talked to Nathan much more than saying hello. Yeah, so the thing is like this great, I always tell people, I said, I'm just always so impressed with all the things that I'm giving credit for. And, and Jimmy just rolls his eyes. But this is another thing that people forget. In 2012, we had the patriotic demonstration, the patriotic education, where C.Y. Lung was trying to put pro-communist propaganda and education in the schools. Well, the story, what happened there is a bunch of mothers got on Facebook. In fact, it's really almost historic in social media. It was really the first kind of, basically the mothers got together and said, no, no, no. And this group grew from like 40 women to 80 women to 800 women to 8,000 women to 40,000, people in this mothers group that was opposing patriotic education. And so, but they were really just kind of opposing it, almost like going to school board meetings. Then the young kids came along, which was Joshua and a bunch of the other kids came, Joshua and Nathan, who were really only 13, 14, 15 years old. And they took it to town. They're the ones who really drove it across. They drove it over there. They started doing the public demonstrations. We had no interaction with them whatsoever, other than one thing. Jimmy owns Apple Daily, and Apple Daily, of course, covered it quite extensively. It was very much, basically saying these kids have a point. Let's do it. They were basically covering it from all angles, but it was really seen as, what's basically as a movement by most people of these young people. Nobody really thought any more than just, well, Apple Daily, of course, is on their side, which we were. But the funniest thing that happened about a year later, after the kids won and after everything settled down, I remember I was out at a lunch and I was confronted by a couple of guys who I wouldn't say they're pro Beijing, but they're, they don't really like all they're more comfortable with like an authoritarian regime that makes business good. And these are not dumb guys. And they're sitting there and they're talking to me and they're going, well, you guys really had a big win. They're telling me that you guys won this and you guys won that. And there was a journalist, I won't say who it is, sitting at our table, international journalist of some decent reputation. And I said, well, we had nothing to do with it. We had nothing to do with it. And he's like, what do you mean they didn't believe me? And at the end of the thing, the journalist looks at me, he goes, Mark, seriously? Do you think anybody in this town is going to believe our C.Y. Lung is going to pick up the phone, who was his chief executive then, and say, hey, Beijing, I just got my ass kicked by a bunch of 13 and 14-year-olds? Or is he going to pick up the phone and say, that damn Jimmy Lai did it again? The point is, they don't give anybody agency for anything. It's like, 2 million people turned out on the streets. It was Apple Daily. I still remember people telling people that we paid people. And I was just interested, like, what do we have, a giant PayPal account? Or did we use Venmo? Or how did we do that? You know what I'm saying? Right. 2 million people, what was the going rate? This is the problem you have is that they spread lies. And, fortunately, they're now being debunked pretty effectively. But they don't need to lie to everybody. They just need to make sure that they have a story, and then they're going to go with it. And that's the whole thing. Jimmy's part of a narrative. That's how I see it. People ask me all the time. As far as the details and everything, I'll let the defense lawyers handle that. I think they've got it well in hand, But the torture thing, really, I don't see how people. The Hong Kong police had to know. They're not stupid. They've been dealing with China for a long time. They had to know that when they put these kids in the hands of the mainland, something bad was going to happen. And they had to know that. They had to know that. And they're using information derived from that. And then they come back and they put the two main guys in a mental institution, which is not Siu Lam is not a nice place. I know where they're staying, I know where they're being kept, but you don't put them there, So I think it's I think it's pretty obvious that coercive means were used. I think they have a very tough time. The government's have a very tough time denying this.
Well, that's the thing. So before we open the aperture to China around the world, but they're thinking this helps them. They have intentionally selected a very long trial that appears like it'll run for more than half the year. They think this is sort of helpful. And to me, you sort of look back on I'm usually very cautious with Hitler analogies, but with the Nazi show trials after the assassination attempt on Hitler, or the Soviet show trials, and you're just like, how do they think this helps them domestically or abroad? And this is almost worse. Not that I'm saying they're worse than the Nazis or the Soviets. What I'm saying is that they think they're doing brilliant public relations here, and this is somehow going to help them. And it seems like a daily advertisement to how, first of all, the guys in Hong Kong, the authorities are Keystone cops. They're trying to impress Beijing. They are failing. And you have the press around the world united in a way that almost you have to go back to 9/11 to see, from the UK Guardian on one side to the Wall Street Journal, all the wire services, sort of you name it, with regional press that think this is ridiculous, that it's an unfair, it's a show trial. Again, not getting ahead of ourselves, but I would presume if he is allowed to, that Jimmy would take the stand, and that will be sort of this Mandela-like figure speaking in Cantonese to the people of Hong Kong in a way that no one has.
Well, I do think that they have not thought that through. I don't know the plans yet. I mean, look, I am a co-conspirator. I have been in that position for a long, long time. It was kind of interesting. Early on, the Hong Kong government, for whatever reason, I was getting the documents for like the indictments on Jimmy. Like I had a lawyer who was getting them, you know what I'm saying? It was like, whatever. So I've got a few of the early stuff. I've got that. And, of course they've stopped, and I stopped becoming an open. But I know there's warrants out for my arrest on almost, I'm told it's probably these three that Jimmy are tried on, because I'm on all three of those, those three. And then it would also be previous ones too. Of course, the fraud case. And then, of
the
course,
time you jaywalked on Nathan Road.
Yeah. We're the whole running naked through Central thing during the trial. Unfortunately, my body type in Hong Kong, I just can't deny that one. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to be able to say it with some other guy. You know what I'm saying? That's like, just real quick for everybody. I told you that story one time when we were out watching the protest, and there was this like very large guy who was like 6'7", Hong Kong guy, like 6'7", 6'6", big kid. And we're standing there, and like, he's dressed in all black and all that stuff. And he's going like, oh, nobody knows who I am. And like, with a bunch of journalists and all the Hong Kong, you idiot. Everybody knows who you are. You're the only 6 foot plus, like the only 6'5" plus guy in Hong Kong. Get the hell out of here. Fortunately, I know he's not in Hong Kong anymore. That's why I tell that story. But it's in other words, it's that they, all this stuff with like Mark Simon moved this money and that money. People forget I was picked up I got picked up in Shenzhen in 2004. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I've been dealing with the ICAC and the CID. They've been in my bank accounts for like 18 years. You know what I'm saying? They've frozen all my bank accounts. They write people You know what I'm saying? In 2014, they contacted HSBC Hong Kong about money that was transferred. In 2019, they transferred. I can't move money internationally from a couple of accounts because of what happens. I mean, I've straightened all this out. I don't really believe in going and running out and going, I just fix it and move on. And fortunately for me, the three banks that I've had to deal with have been very good about like going, okay, we know who you are. However, you're still not allowed to do this. So no internet, which I don't care. But the thing is that I do believe, that essentially Hong Kong's really the turning point. But, I'll take this into another subject. And the reason why I think it's so detrimental to China is I have to tell you, Christian, I don't really know how China recovers now. I saw a good Bloomberg story the other day. Entry-level salaries for young people have dropped over 20%. So in other words, if you were hiring a guy for a marketing job in 2021 and you're hiring in 2013, you've gone from, say you're paying the guy 20,000 RMB a month to 16,000. Inflation has gone up, in that time, say 12%, say 6% a year to be completely conservative. So in other words, where you should have had that job taken up, this is now really a 30% cut in real wages in terms of starting. And you're facing that, you're dealing with that in terms of a shrinking entry-level labor force because of the population depression. I don't know how to model that. I don't know what model gets you out of that. You know what I'm saying? I mean, people say, well, the pure economic growth. Mm-hmm. But are you going to get pure economic growth when you have Xi Jinping celebrating Mao?
Right.
I don't know how this ends. I mean, I know how it ends, but I hope it ends peacefully. But I don't see any hope other than the fact, America's picking up. I saw something from Michael Yon the other day. He's that combat correspondent, you know what I'm saying? And Michael's a little over the top for me. I love Michael, but he's a little over top for me in terms of like calling it an invasion and all that stuff. But he's not wrong in the sense that there are a lot of Chinese coming over the southern border. I was told the other day that they think it's probably been this year, 2023, over 75,000.
And you think, and so are these just people looking for a better economic circumstance, and they're mostly young men, or is it families, or some of them, the sinister claim is that some of them may be able to form a fifth column in the U.S. if we have a war. But I doubt that, right?
I love the quote from the U.S. ambassador in 1917. He's in Austria. In London, and he's having dinner, and I can't remember the guy's name. And the German ambassador is saying to him, Mr. Ambassador, American ambassador, it's in the book Dark Nation by Sidney Blumenthal. He tells the story. I've heard it before from other people too. He tells the U.S. ambassador, there are over 1 million Germans who live in 2 million Germans who live in America who are immigrants. Are you really sure you want to support the English and risk their wrath? And he goes, yeah. And there are 2 million light poles in the United States to have every one of those guys swinging from one of those, hang them. I never really worry about the fifth column too much, other than in the business community and the political lobbying. Even the political lobbying, I don't worry about it so much because it gets found out. It's really the deviousness in the business community. And it's usually our own greedy sons of bitches who are doing it. You know what I'm saying? In other words, it's the Chinese try all they want. They try to do things. That's it. But I'm not worried about a fifth column because I think the blowback would be so incredible. It's one of the reasons why if you see like they attacked Anna Wu and they attacked at Joey Sue and they attacked Francis and they attacked these young women over here, but it's inside the ethnic group. You know what I'm saying? Hoping nobody notices. The day these guys come walking down the street with red flags, I don't care whether it's in Queens or whether it's in California, and start like doing anti-American stuff, holding, the communist flag, I think there'll be an ass kicking of epic proportion. I don't think the Chinese community wants any of that. And I think I happen to know many of them get very upset when they have their favorite uncle who's out there saying Xi Jinping is a great man. You know,
Right.
I don't see the threat. I think it's a net plus for us. I just wish it would be much more orderly. It's the problem is the disorder and the abuse that happens to these people before they get across. So they show up. But when you watch Michael's videos, you can see, I mean, you see guys coming over and they're supposedly walking into the UN refugee camp and they have spotless tennis shoes. Nobody comes to the Darien Gap in spotless tennis shoes. What happens is you flew into Ecuador. You took a private plane from Ecuador to an airport in Mexico. You got off, you got on a bus, and then you got driven to a mile outside of the camp, and then you walked in. I saw a video of a woman. She's literally wearing, it looks like just this beautiful blouse. Nobody wears that blouse coming in. And I've heard from people, this is really what's going on. But look, it's our benefit. But most of these people coming over, from what I've seen, from what I've talked to people who are down on the border, and I've talked to one or two Chinese groups, most of them are economic refugees. They're not even political refugees, which they're supposed to be. They're economic refugees. They just can't make it in China anymore. I think the most nefarious we probably see, I'm sure we see some triad guys. I'm sure we see some women coming over to go into prostitution, unfortunately, who are being trafficked, are trafficking themselves. But I also think that, entering it for debt. But I also think a lot of it is also people escaping debt, but just people getting out. I mean, it's really, to be honest with you, Michael interviews some of these people and they just want to come to America. You know what I'm saying? They're not stopping.
Right. Right.
So, but I think that's a reflection of the hopelessness in China.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, no, I think that's when people are fleeing a place, it just undermines any argument that things are going well, and that applies here to the U.S. states. Just quickly before we go, while we're still on the topic of economics and China's economy, so a lot of Chinese goods going to Europe go through the Red Sea on the way to the Suez Canal, the way to the Mediterranean, which puts you in Europe. And the Houthi have that not completely bottled up, but still, I think Maersk and a bunch of other big shipping companies, BP, are sending their stuff around the Horn of Africa. The U.S. Navy is lessening its presence there. The Gerald Ford aircraft carrier and her group are heading home. They were held over a little bit when this crisis erupted, but it's interesting. We see another crisis. China has run its mouth a little bit about this, but offers absolutely nothing in terms of helping to secure this crucial waterway. And I don't know. Would the crimp on exports actually have an impact on China's economy?
Let me ask you. I mean, you're much better at the strategic stuff than I am. What do you think? How serious do you think the Iranians are about this? I mean, are they really looking to shut stuff down, or are they looking to do selective? In other words, is a Costco, a China ocean ship going to get through, and then nobody else? They're only going to go after Zim, the Israeli ships. I mean, how serious? Because the Houthis are basically, that's an Iranian proxy group.
That's right. Now, I think they're testing still. I don't think they've decided how big they're going to go, and they want to see what the pushback from the U.S. is. Britain and France also, some naval capability there. And also to see how the Saudis are reacting. I mean, the Saudis and the UAE were at war with the Houthis, and we, including great moralists like Robert Menendez, the indicted senator from New Jersey, saying what you're doing, what the Saudis and what the Emiratis are doing in Yemen is bad. These are human rights violations. This war must end, leaving this Iranian proxy in power. Also, the Houthis shot a bunch of ballistic missiles at Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and the United States did nothing. I mean, I think we sell them Patriots, but these are people who thought we would at least be involved in their defense somewhat, since we have informal treaties, but informal defense agreements, and we were nowhere to be found. And so now it's this question I was asking people on Capitol today: are the Saudis telling us that we should do more, or are they telling us don't do anything because we don't want you to hit a bee's hive and then walk away? And the response was that so far, despite everything that's happened in Israel, despite what Hamas, which is an Iranian proxy, and Hezbollah and the Houthi are doing, the administration is still determined to have some sort of negotiated deal or a sustainable relationship with Iran, and that there's not going to be a serious pushback. So to me, that sounds like there will be escalation. Now, Iran does sell a lot of oil to China. It sells at below market prices in violation of sanctions. But so I don't think they're going to go out of their way to irritate China. But China benefits tremendously and has, U.S. naval protection of the global commons as its cause. You might call it naval domination since 44, 45, Leyte Gulf, or the end of the war. Chips in nothing, offers nothing, brings nothing to the table. So it's actually kind of, in that sense, I guess it's a little bit of a happy reminder that even though China is trying to put these little points of pressure and power around the world, they have something in the Horn of Africa. They turn up at times in the Mediterranean, that they really can't project power now, and they can't really bring anything to bear, whether it's money or intelligence or peacekeeping or governance or anything in these international crises. They still are, in some ways, at least a regional mindset.
I'd agree. I think the other thing is that I know all people in the freight world are like, oh, this is a big deal. Look, at the end of the day, if the freight's delayed and it has to go around a different way or has to take a longer way around or this and that, the fact of the matter is we spent 2020 and 2000 to 2022 with ships backed up for 45 or 50 days. Where? On just postal courts. In other words, you were always 25, 30 days behind. The Panama Canal has been running low because of low water levels or something like that for months. So the fact that you add another 7 days somewhere in the Middle East to a container ship or a shipload of iron ore or something like that, basically, all right, well, that adds another $20,000 a day to a ship, so $100,000 a voyage. So that works out to roughly 1 cent per day per pound of coal, or 2 cents per day per sneakers. You know what I'm saying? In other words,
Right.
I think the economic implications are not what people think they are at this point in time. I think if they close it, which I think is a possibility, which the Iranians may not want, but if they can find a way to control it and cause chaos, I think that's a much more dangerous thing. I think the problem with my logic, and I know it's the logic there that's not a very good one, is it assumes that chaos is okay. And the fact of the matter is you don't get the efficiencies that you need in the international economy. So the Chinese basically, their U.S. market and their European market, they just service from a different way. In other words, they have round-the-world ships now. They make those smaller. They make them Panamex, which means they can go through the Panama Canal, and they just go that way, or they bring it around another way. Adds what? 8, 9, 10 days. Just changes the flow of goods for China.
Right.
In other words, they started in Singapore. They started in Shanghai. It comes to LA. The ship goes around and around and around. Then from New York, the ship just goes over. Now, that's not really an effective thing to do, but simple fact of the matter is those big ships escorted, those giant container ships are getting through the Gulf, through this Gulf and through there, and the Houthis aren't hitting every one of them. And also, quite frankly, if you hit a giant container ship, and this is Maersk's position, it's like, all right, how bad is it going to be? As long as you can't take control of it, which Maersk is basically loading like 20 special forces guys on it who are basically drinking beer and having a laugh. It's impossible to board those things if they don't want you to board them. I mean, the idea that you could, like they show the one where the helicopter comes down. Well, the helicopter came down. There was nobody there to stop it. Okay.
Right.
But if you had like ex-special forces guys on there and they're flying a helicopter and you try to land a helicopter on a ship, they'll blow you out of the sky.
Right.
Once they know you're coming, they've got the heavy machine guns to do it. They'll cut you down like rats. They're highly trained. But getting away from the Rambo stuff, I do think that I do think it's just amazing to me that we're seeing once again that the Chinese. The funny thing about it is the Chinese go, oh, it's not really in our interest. And they're like, tee, we are really making you do things. That's not how the world looks at it. But the world looks at it as like, basically, you guys, you're just worthless. Like you said, in Ukraine, you're worthless. You don't do anything. You're a declining power. And that's the funniest thing about Xi Jinping is like, all right, you can beat up Hong Kong all day long. That's inside of you. That's going to make you tough. But globally, worldwide, I think the next place we're going to see, and then I'll finish after this one, is the next place we're going to see just to end is in Africa. I think the Chinese are done in Africa. That's going to start happening pretty soon. And that's because the U.S. and Europe aren't going to be investing in China anymore. And it doesn't take a lot of money to start flowing down into Africa. And who would you rather deal with? Let's be perfectly honest with you. The Chinese are not well liked in Africa. They got money, but other than that, they're not well liked. So I think the U.S. companies can come in there and they can start doing things, and we'll start seeing Chinese manufacturers shift to work with the U.S. buyers and the European buyers, and that changes everything. Fairness, people don't understand it. Once Walmart, Target, and everybody else starts buying and starts trying to put in some of these codes of conduct, that changes the factories. It does. I've seen it many, many times. When you go to a place like Myanmar, and when you go to some other places, and you see the guys who are selling to China, the guys who are selling to Southeast Asia, they are literally indentured servant slots. And then a mile down the road, the guy who's selling to Adidas, the guy who's selling this, it's not someplace I'd want my kids to grow up, but it's a hell of a lot better than this place. And they're always working on it. They're always working on those things. And I know it sounds cynical, but my point being is that changes the populace very quickly. Like you go to the Philippines or something like that. The Philippines or those places, if a U.S. manufacturer opens up, everybody tries to get over there because they know they're going to be treated better because they know they have to. That's the manufacturer. That's the way we do things. British too, same thing. Germans, surprisingly, yes.
Yeah, with a 35-hour work week. All right, let's leave it there. That's all the time we have for this episode of Simon Wine. We'll be back with another episode with Mark from Taiwan very soon. Bye-bye.